Thank you all so much for sharing the Unashamedly You podcast week after week. I am forever grateful for you. So let's kick off this week with our Share to Social winner. Sara Shemwell, congratulations. Yay, message me for your Starbucks gift card. Don't forget to enter this giveaway each week. It's so simple. You just share this week's podcast to your stories, tag us at unashamedly.you, and you're entered. Hello and welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast, a space to enlighten, encourage, and empower you to go out and unashamedly be who God is calling you to be. I am your host, Jamie Herndon. I pray you hear less of me and more of Him as you listen to today's episode. Let's grow together. God's ways are not always our ways. They're higher. Today, we're delighted to be hearing from someone that knows what it's like to be in the waiting, yet making the most of that time while they're in it. So you have dove in and not allowed circumstances or life to ride you, but you have rode life. You've created a purpose out of your passion and allowed God to use you in mighty ways to help women in His kingdom. And I could not be more excited to have you on to be sharing your story with us today.
Well, thank you for having me today. It's such an honor to be here. And I want to say we were chatting a little bit before we hit record, and there were so many little good gold nuggets in there. I hope we can replicate those to share. For those of you who don't know, I was single for 39 years. I got married the day before my 39th birthday. It wasn't really planned that way. It just was how timing and everything worked out. So I have a heart for people who are not currently married, people who've either never been married, who are widowed, divorced. We were talking earlier, like I said, I understand the tenderness and vulnerability of this topic. And I want to speak from a place of understanding and awareness. I want you guys to know that I realize we're all at different stages of life. Even if you're not married, you have different circumstances. If something I say doesn't apply to where you are, run it through your inner circle, your people who know you best. And if it doesn't apply to you, just disregard it. I also wanted to say this is something that kind of helped me in my early days before I go into my story, is that just because you get married doesn't mean you have all the answers about relationships or how to find someone. Every story is different. I remember hearing the stories about, oh, I met my husband at a conference, or I've heard guys say, I saw her across the room at a conference and I knew she was my wife. And I was thinking, Lord, that never happened to me. It was everybody else's story, but it wasn't mine. So I met my husband at the beginning of 2020. What happened was we were both at a conference and his pastor's wife came up to me and she said, I want to introduce you to somebody. And at that point, I was 36 or 37. I was kind of done. I didn't want to meet anybody. And she said, just please meet him. And I was like, no, I really don't want to meet anybody. And she kept asking. So finally I was like, okay, well, he was in a conversation that lasted forever and we ended up having to leave. So I think it was maybe the next day he DMs me on Instagram and I thought, oh, another guy reaching out. I sent him back like a one-word answer, just being kind, and didn't really, open up a lot. Well, then probably about a month later, I thought, you know what does it hurt for me to have another friend? I'm not committing to a relationship with anybody. I need to be open to friendships, because what I discovered for myself after years and years of not being married and, kind of having your heart broken, I had gotten to the place where I knew that I could very easily just not try anymore, because it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable, especially when you're part of a church and you meet someone and they start visiting your church, and then everybody's asking questions, and then you have to say, it's like you're ripping your heart out every time that somebody doesn't work out. And so I thought, okay, I'll just message him back. So we ended up communicating. He got my number and I ended up meeting him face to face. So that was through COVID, which was a very interesting year to be alive, much less try to develop a relationship with someone. And then we ended up getting married January 8th of 2022. So we've been married a little over a year now.
I love how you said not everyone's story is going to be your story. And so many times, I think in every situation we look to that, we see someone else has something that we want and we listen to what they have to say and what their story was. And you wonder, like, is that going to be my story? I've seen that happen with people with, once you do get married and then you want to have children and then it doesn't happen that way, or maybe with the job and it doesn't happen that way. God doesn't have every single person the same story and the same plan. That's why there's so many examples in the Bible for us to see, is because not everybody had the same plan, even though they were all in God's plan and in his will. It wasn't that they all had the exact same thing that they had to do in the same purpose. You didn't get married until you were 39, but you didn't wait around. And I love that about you as well, is you went out and you've done something and you've worked for the kingdom of God. You don't have to be married to have a place in God's kingdom. So share a little bit about that and some of the things that you've done.
So, correct. I did not wait around, even though it felt like waiting and it felt like a very long time. I kept my hands busy, played for a lot of conferences. I feel like everybody's like, oh, I saw you here, I saw you there. And I was trying to stay focused, to be involved in the kingdom. I started Tune Bucket during that time, and I'm teaching piano lessons. So I really tried to focus on what was right in front of me, what I could control, what I could invest in, even investing in myself. I went to business conferences, just tried to think outside of the box as far as what I thought my life would look like, and even started to develop a community around me. I realized at one point, on days when I was feeling lonely, that God wasn't always going to speak to someone to call me. Sometimes I had to text somebody and say, hey, you want to go get lunch? Hey, you want to go hiking? Do you want to do dinner this week? Do you want to meet for coffee? Because the reality is that no matter what stage of life that you're in, everybody wants that connection in that community. And if I had it on my heart that I was lonely and needing connection, then maybe the person I was reaching out to needed that too, but they just didn't know how to ask.
When you were going through this time and the years were passing, I'm sure you're like, is this the year that I'm going to get married? And then it wouldn't happen. And is this the year? And then it didn't happen. And time went on, and you said that vulnerability was coming. What is something that you could tell someone that may be in that waiting season right now?
Yeah, so like I said, I invested in myself, my finances, my business. My pastor at the time helped me get a 401k set up for retirement, because that's not anything that I had ever done before. I didn't even know how to do it. It was honestly scary. And, part of me thought, and I feel like this is a big topic, part of me thought that if I buy a house, if I go after my business, if I have a 401k, if I do anything to plan for the future, then that's a step that shows God that I don't have faith. And so it was a struggle for me to overcome that and to realize that God is not sitting in heaven with a checklist of things I'm doing saying, oh, well, you went and got a 401k today, you don't have faith, or you started a business and tried to support yourself financially, you don't have faith. And when I overcame that, it made living easier. It made being not married a little easier, because I didn't feel the pressure. I don't know if it came internally from my thoughts or from things that people had told me, but it allowed me to just live and to follow what I thought was the next step in front of me, to seek God, to seek counsel, but most of all, to live, and not to live in a prison of fear where I thought I was going to mess up the will of God.
I love that. That is so good and so true. About, in our minds, it's the certain checklist way because that's how we think. But his ways are higher and they're not ours. And he's not thinking in a checklist and, oh, she's not doing this, she is doing this. I remember one time our bishop was talking to someone and he said, God's not sitting in heaven with the rod waiting on you to do something wrong and just, slap you with it. Like, he's a just God, he's a loving God, and he wants us to be going out and doing things and to be caring about our future. He talks about that. And so that's having faith, is caring about your future and allowing him to work out the details that we have no control over. So I love that you had talked about that. So I got married at 20. It was right before my 21st birthday. So I know that our stories are not the same, but that's the point of the Unashamedly You community, is that being able to unashamedly walk in God's plan and purpose and where you are. I know that sometimes I've had so many reach out, really way more than I expected. So if you've reached out to me, know that you're not alone. You're not the only one that has. And that is why I have asked Melody to be on here today, is because we're talking about things that are real and it's a real issue. I know that sometimes unashamedly walking in your purpose doesn't always mean that it's the purpose and the plan that you wanted to walk in. Sometimes it's you're walking in it because God has you there, and you have no need to be ashamed of where God has you. Just because you're single may not mean that you're excited about that. It may not be the plan that you had or the focus and the purpose that you had in mind, but it's where you're at, and unashamedly realizing that you have no need to be ashamed of that. So we were talking earlier, and you had talked a little bit that there is maybe some grief that comes along with being single for so long, especially whenever you had an idea of what you wanted your future to be and God had a different plan. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, 100%. And it took me a while to realize that it was grief because it felt so painful. I think one of the biggest recommendations I could give for people in general, but especially if you're in a season of waiting, is to learn how to process what you're feeling, learn how to process your grief. And you may not even realize that it's grief. But when you have an idea, when you have dreams that you feel like are God-given, and they don't happen when you thought that they would, or by a certain, time where you feel like life is passing you by, then you have to grieve that what didn't happen. Because what can happen in your mind, in your heart, is that you start to get a little bit upset about, why didn't this happen to me by a certain time? How is someone who's maybe almost 20 years younger than me, how are they more qualified to receive what we call quote unquote blessings from God? And I'm careful to call the things I receive blessings, because there was a period of time where I would look at what people called blessings and I thought, well, am I not worthy to receive blessings too? What am I doing wrong? So whether it's through counseling, whether it's through your pastor and pastor's wife or trusted friends, being able to talk that out and get that out of your system, be able to process. Belonging is a basic human need. And I remember mentioning to someone that I was lonely. And this was a time in my life where I was serving at a church and I didn't really have friends close. There was really nobody my age. I had kind of no outlets unless I drove for a couple hours. And what I was trying to communicate is that I just needed human connection. But I think what was understood is that I was lonely because I wasn't married. And so I didn't know how to communicate that or how to talk that out. There are studies on solitary confinement that show how it affects your mind and how difficult it is. I mean, solitary confinement is a punishment. So if you are not married and you live by yourself and you're feeling down and discouraged and lonely, you're not crazy. God created us for community. We're wired for relationship. He created Eve for Adam because he said it wasn't good for Adam to be alone. Okay, that's in the Bible. So with every birthday, you may mourn the loss of what could have been. And the older you get, you may have to mourn things that may never happen to you. At a certain point, maybe you won't be able to have children. At a certain point, maybe the person that you married won't look like the person you thought you would have married at 20. Mourning even the possibility of not getting married. Me and one of my friends had a very deep conversation one time about we're not promised to get married. So mourning that. And most people don't think of it this way, but it's the same way as people who are longing for children. With every passing year, if they don't have a child, they're mourning, their heart's bleeding, they're hurting. If you've lost someone to death, the day they died or their birthday can cause you to grieve, and it comes in waves. Grief comes when you least expect it. When you're unmarried and you get old enough, you start seeing people who were raised with you, maybe people you went to Bible college, and unfortunately, some of their marriages are falling apart, and your world is rocked again because now the thing that you want is falling apart for some people. I mean, this is reality. These are the things I lived. These are the things my friends lived, and we would call and talk about, and just, you wonder to God, like, how can we have an assurity, a promise of something to come? And you see all of the things that are happening in the world. And then you start building walls in regards to relationships that get thicker and higher because now you're older and you know things that can go right, things that can go wrong. So processing all of that, I believe, is very important because, like I said earlier, it's very easy for someone who is unmarried to decide to not try again, to kind of give up. So you have to make a conscious effort. If you believe this is God's will for your life, you have to put yourself out there. You have to open your mouth and talk to somebody. You have to try and see if a relationship will happen.
Wow, that was really deep and things that I've never thought of before. And so that is one reason why I know that this podcast is needed. And I know that your story is needed, is because there are things that if you haven't experienced it or went through it, then you are not going to understand it. And we're here to help one another. We're in the kingdom for a reason and for a purpose. And sometimes our purpose, like I said earlier, isn't what we wanted to be our purpose. It's not a story that we wanted to walk through. It's not something that we wanted to live through. Any type of grief, whether it's I have grieved a living parent that was not in my life at one point, and grief of what could have been with family. And there's a lot to grieve, but grieving the what should have been, what could have been, what was in your mind that is not, is so true. It's so real. It's a reality of it, and just coming to grips with that reality. One thing that you said that I liked was meeting someone that maybe in your late 30s wasn't the same person that you had in mind for your 20s. I see that a lot where people have this one person in their head. They're stuck with, this is what this person's going to be. This is all the boxes that they're going to check. And then if you drop it or you don't do that, either one, you didn't have faith for them, and, or two, you're letting go of your list that you had, what are some things that you could say about that?
It's a catch-22. When I started dating my husband, the most important thing to me was that he was going to live for God and he was never going to walk away from God. That was the most important thing. And I do remember, I wish I had the list in front of me, but I made the list when I was a teenager of things I wanted. And I'm almost positive it said blonde hair and blue eyes. And I did not get either of those. And I'm so grateful.
That's hilarious. So yes, there are things that you put on there that are really important at 18. I always say the person that I would have married at 17 is not the person I married at 20, even though the years were really short differences. And you realize whenever you turn 30 that hopefully God had his hand in your life like he did in mine if you got married young. But there are things that I definitely would have had on a list at 30 that I wouldn't have thought about at 20. So that is so true. So there is, speaking of list and things like that, there's pressure that we put on ourselves. I feel like we hold ourselves at a higher standard and higher accountability in our minds than what really should even be out there sometimes. And then that follows you all the way through. It follows you through being a wife. And then whenever you're a new mom, I know as a new mom, I had all kinds of thoughts and ideas and pressures on myself, and things that I thought people thought, and then things that really were pressures out there they weren't just made up in my head. And so I know that there's those same pressures on everyone, no matter what walk that they're going through. And then the walk of being single. How did you deal with some of those things?
Um, I don't know is the honest answer. Sometimes I was blindsided by things I would feel or things that people would tell me. I remember one time I had flown somewhere to hang out with this guy that I'd met, and I came back and somebody asked me, well, are you going to marry him? And I felt so much pressure. I just called it off with him because I was like, I don't know. Like, I've met him one time. Like, if I don't know I'm going to marry him, then I can't keep this going. And those pressures, I feel like were so heavy and, unrealistic for me and my personality. And I also felt pressure from things that people said to me. A lot of unmarried people hear the same things over and over. And I'll give you a few examples. I was talking to a pastor's wife friend at Little Rock Camp meeting, and we're talking about her daughter who was not married yet. And she was, in this stage where, the daughter was just feeling like she was in a weird place in life, and her mom was trying to understand. And I just told her mom, I said, it's because people always relate your value, or you feel that they relate your value to if you're married. And I said, 9 times out of 10, if someone comes up and talks to me, the first thing they're going to ask me is if I'm married. And I kid you not, in the middle of our conversation, a lady walks up to me and she says, hey, Melody, are you married yet? And me and the pastor's wife just looked at each other like I could not have made this up. And it caught me so off guard because I had just told the story, but also I didn't have a close relationship with this lady. I didn't recognize even who she was, but it was such poetic justice for that to happen in that moment. And then when the lady was gone, I turned to the pastor's wife and I said, see, I told you stuff like this happens all the time. So when I'm conversating with someone who's not married, I will steer away from any questions about relationship status. And, there are questions you can ask like, hey, good to see you. How was your last year? How's your family? How have you been? Let someone open up to you, because if they are married or engaged, I promise they will tell you. I had another instance happen where someone who's well known that I respected a lot came up to me at a ladies' conference, and she said, hey, Melody, she said, are you married yet? And I said, no, ma'am. She said, don't be discouraged. We just had a girl in her 30s. She just got married. She married a guy. Now he's not in church and he doesn't have the Holy Ghost, but we're believing he will. And she turned around and walked away. And I thought, oh my word. And I immediately went and told my pastor's wife that had I been a year or two prior in the stage of life where I felt like every voice that spoke to me was the voice of God, that would have crushed me. And I think sometimes people want to have a conversation. They want to let you know that they see you and that they want you to find someone who's married, but they don't know how to word it. So instead of saying something that's maybe helpful, they just say whatever comes to their mind, and they don't mean anything by it, but you do hear a lot of those kinds of things.
I'm mind blown. You're like, it's so rude. But the same thing happens all the time with people that are going to have a baby. And you hear about this, they're like, do not ask a woman if she's pregnant. Number one, don't ask her that, because if she's not, and she's immediately going to the fact that I've gained weight. And number two, not to ask that, because you never know if they're trying, if they want a baby. And the same thing with marriage. Every woman wants to be married. And if they don't want to be married, you probably already know that, because they've probably told everybody, I am not getting married. I do not want to be married. And there's probably an issue or a reason why, if they feel that way. And I love that you said there's so many other things to ask and different ways to ask it. But a lot of times we don't think of those things. We think of the one common denominator or the one thing that you want to know, and just being able to go out and ask that. This is so helpful and so insightful. I know that you're helping so many people right now. Really, just you've opened my eyes alone to so many things that you've talked about. And the waiting season is hard. Like you mentioned earlier, you feel like you don't have faith if you do things while you're in the waiting season that you thought would be done with your spouse. One thing you said and had pointed out was you're not promised marriage. Like God promised he'd never leave you. He'd never forsake you. He promised all these things, and he promised he would answer your prayers. but you're not promised that you are going to get married. And so being able to know that in those times, God is with you and he's not going to leave you alone. But you did end up meeting a spouse and getting married before your 39th birthday. Tell us a little bit about your relationship and how you met him. I'm sure that you had talked about having those guards up and not wanting to meet someone. You said he DM'd you. Tell us a little bit more about your relationship and how all those things happen.
Yeah, so he DM'd me and we talked for maybe a day or two before he got my number. And then I think like the next weekend, him and his friend came down and we hung out at Newport Beach for the day and, just got to know each other. And then we lived about 5 hours apart, thanks to LA traffic. And so, he would make the trip down, I would make the trip up and meet his family and hang out with his friends. And then he would come down and we would hang out. It was, like I said, it was a weird time because it started in 2020. So I don't know. I felt like it would have been different had it been a different year. And then my mom passed away in 2020. So there was a lot of things happening at one time. So we had a long distance relationship. And I've heard people say that, for some people that can be a little bit of a struggle. But what I felt like was a benefit in a long distance relationship is it forced us to communicate. And we talked about a lot of things. And one of the things that's a benefit to being older and getting married is that you're not afraid to really speak what you think. You're not waiting on someone like the other person's opinion before you give your opinion. And so you can really get to know someone, really get to know who they are, what their values are, what their goals are in life. And by 39, I had already had to forge a path for myself, decide what the direction of my life was going to be, and become that person. So we were two individual people who came together and got married. And I had done what I felt like was a significant amount of work on my end, just looking in the mirror of myself, asking other people what are things I need to work on, what are areas I need to grow in. Because once you get married, you don't become all of a sudden a wise person who has your life together. If the two people who aren't working on their issues come together, then it just becomes one big issue, right? So I'm a big believer on getting counseling, whatever it takes to get yourself in a healthy place. If you've had any kind of trauma, or even if you haven't had trauma, but you come from two different backgrounds, really looking at yourself and understanding yourself so that you can come together and build a life with someone who is very different. And being older, you have your habits that you don't even realize you've developed, and you have to be willing to kind of put almost everything aside as far as your habits and learn to build a new normal.
It is so true that getting married is not going to make all of your dreams come true. You have to have already known who you are, worked on yourself. There's a lot that goes into it that beforehand, I think that you think maybe getting married will solve all of your problems, but really it's just two of you working on one problem. And so then you have extra opinions and extra help that you may not always want on a problem. So you guys had the long distance relationship and all the things were going on, and then losing your mom. I know that had to be so hard to be creating a new relationship and going through so much grief and loss as well. But you kept driving back and forth. And then when did you realize that he was the one and it was going to work out?
Well, a long time before he proposed. I thought he was going to propose on Christmas of, let's see, that would have been wait, I'm getting my years mixed up. We got married in 22, so that would have been 2020 maybe. But he didn't propose until August of 2021. And it was actually at San Jose camp meeting. And my friend was trying to throw me off. And I don't remember what she said. She was trying to throw me off because I knew like something was happening. You can just tell when somebody's nervous and they're about to propose. They get nervous and they start acting all weird. And that was happening. And so we had talked about, I don't remember, we're going to go to San Francisco or something. I don't remember where we're going. And oh no, let's not do that. Let's just go eat for the night. And so we ended up going to a place there in San Jose that had a really pretty, like a shopping center, but had a really pretty walkway with palm trees and stuff. I thought we were just going to go out to eat with their church members and like our friends that were there. And so everybody was there, and I was outside and it was freezing cold. And his mom kept telling my husband, she was like, give her your jacket, give her your jacket. And he was like, no, no. And I was like, okay, I guess he's not going to give me his jacket. Well, he had the watch in there and he didn't want me to know.
That's hilarious.
So I'm sitting out there freezing. And so finally he tells me, he said, you want to go on a walk? I was like, sure. And so we start walking down the little, way that had the palm trees and stuff. And he said, so I'm sure you know why everybody's here. And I was like, yes, just ask the question already. So he kind of walked down a little way and then he got down on one knee and asked, and I was excited. I was very ready for him to ask. So it wasn't a surprise, but it was a sweet moment. And I cherish the videos. I have videos that people took of him proposing and me jumping up and down for joy. And it was just a special moment.
That's so sweet. I love that. So, someone that is in the waiting season right now, and they may feel like it's never going to end, it drags on what feels like for a long time. And sometimes people's waiting season is longer than others. What would you say is something that you look back and you're like, I'm so glad I did this. And I'm so glad that this was already done and accomplished, something that they may could be working on or something that they may not even think of that they could be doing while they're in this season?
I'm so glad that I had already established my business. I, was able to go into marriage and, I basically work remotely. So I had a job. I didn't have to have a big job change. That was very nice, especially because I was moving to a new city, a new church, new friends, all of that. I'm glad that I invested in myself. And I really, like I said, try to take a hard look at who I was and things I needed to work on. I do regret not traveling more. I did have the privilege of going to Africa probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And that was my first time out of the country. And I wish I had done it sooner. I wish I had maybe the guts to travel alone. It is hard when you're not married to travel because you have to find someone to travel with. And usually it's someone who might live in a different time zone, or they might have a different schedule, they have a different job. So coordinating all of that can be a little bit challenging. But I did stay busy, which was helpful for me. Like I said, it kept my mind focused. And, I don't have a lot of regrets, but I think that just whatever your dreams are, whatever you can go after in this season, I would say do it.
And you did just that with your business and with the Tune Bucket. Tell a little bit about what you do in your business.
Yeah, so I teach women who are discouraged how to play piano online. I have a coaching group where I do live classes, and then I have pre-recorded lessons for people who want to learn to play in church or people who feel stuck in a rut. It took me a while to find my purpose, and I think that's pretty normal for a lot of people. When I first graduated Bible college, I was music director at a church, but normally when you're a music director, you want to find a side hustle too. I thought kinder music would be my thing, and I got all the kinder music material and was learning the songs and all the hand motions. And about probably 2 months in, I was like, I do not like this at all. I do not want to do this for the rest of my life. So I ended up starting Tune Bucket. And originally I thought Tune Bucket was going to be like the music training for your church, where I had band classes for like drummers, bass players, piano players. But then I realized my niche was really teaching women who were discouraged, because I had been there. I had been in a season of my life where, Bible college was gone, all the fanfare was gone, and here I was at a church trying to find new material and really not growing in my playing, kind of feeling stuck and stagnant for years. And I had tried to take piano lessons from somebody who was extremely talented, but they were so smart that teaching wasn't really their gift. And so I remember walking out of the piano lesson and I thought, oh my word, I'll never play like that. They're so good. And so I started to develop tricks for my mind to learn how to play fancy stuff, but my mind didn't think it was fancy. It was easy in my mind. And when I realized I could do that, I thought, oh, I can teach this to other people. I can show other people how easy it really is to play, because when you break it down in a way that's easy, anybody can do it.
And thinking about how that even in the midst of our season of waiting, God still has a purpose and a plan. He can still use you greatly and mightily, and you have allowed him to do just that. So thank you so much for taking time and sharing with us your story. It is such a beautiful story, and I know that it has encouraged so many other women that are in the same season. They're in a waiting season, or they're in the season of grief, or they're in a season where they know people that are there and they know people that are in that season and they know how to help, which was a lot of what you did for me, knowing how to help other people and to be there for them. That is the whole purpose of Unashamedly You, is walking in your purpose and where you are unashamed and being there for other women that are kingdom minded as well. So this has definitely been something that has helped us today. So thank you so much for hopping on here and sharing and empowering others to do the best they can with what life has given. Philippians 4:11 says, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am in to be content." Remember, if this podcast blessed you in any way, go share it to your social media, leave a review, and subscribe so that you get the notification every Friday when our new episode releases. Have the best week.